I want to talk today about the different kinds of perception that exists in the world, different ways of perceiving, knowing, understanding. So opening question is, can you list some different ways that people perceive, understand, take in information of the world? And maybe you can share what some of a strength that you may have or a weakness you may have and one of those ways of perceiving. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Good to see you. Grab a plate. Okay, good. So by the way, just if you're just joining us, the opening question is, what are the different ways of perceiving in the world? Oh, Nelson, I think there's a doorbell ringing over by you. Okay, thank you for got it. Oh, it's a clock saying it's 12. Perfect. That means it's time to start. So different ways of perceiving, different ways of taking in information in the world. Sheila said she takes in information through her area of expertise. So do you want to elaborate on that? Oh, got it. Background. Yeah, got it. Right. Okay, good. Background, culture, right? Culture is a lens through which we take in information, right? We could look at the same thing very differently if I'm a Southerner or if I'm a New Yorker, right? Go ahead, Gary.
Life's experience,
Uh-huh.
whose observation.
Mhm. Experience, observation, and listening.
Yeah.
Right? These are all different ways of taking in information. That's great. Elliot.
As you're implying, we all see things through different lenses, and I think they're tinted to a large extent.
Mhm.
I have been brought up with throughout my life with a lot of love.
Mhm.
And what troubled me was when I saw in the Machzor used here for Yom Kippur,
Mhm.
a section in the Yizkor area that talked about saying Yizkor for parents that were not ideal. I found that troublesome.
Ah,
That was not my lens. I tend to think of the truest love in the world comes from parents. The truest love, if there is any sort of measure of that. The love for husband, wife, and so forth, even good, might be different. But I think the truest love is that of a parent for a child.
okay, so interesting. So, and there was something interesting that happened in the room here, right? So we're talking about how we take in information differently based on our experiences. And you're sharing that you were fortunate enough to have a wonderful, loving environment with parents. I think Frances is sharing a bit vulnerability that was not her experience.
Piece in the Yom Kippur.
And so that piece spoke for her and included her. Right. Right.
Don't you forget.
That's not right. And I don't like your accent.
Wait. What?
Okay.
I know. That was joking. Okay, great. Everybody's different, right? So something might speak to somebody in a way it doesn't speak to somebody else by virtue of their experience, right? So good, Jerry. Uh-huh.
That process when life is good can be good. You can interpret it in that way. So I think it depends in part on your outlook on life.
Outlook on life and your expectations, right? If you go into a certain situation with high expectations, you're bound to be disappointed. If you go in with low expectations, it might pleasantly surprise you. Let's go Nelson, then Karen. Okay, Nelson, go ahead.
Well, first I want to say that it is not necessarily your experience directly. My wife was abused by her parents, by her mother particularly, and that colored her reaction towards parents. And so Yizkor, the new Yizkor spoke to her.
Yeah.
That's my late wife. And it spoke to me because I knew of her problem. This morning, I attended a seminar on what was called neurodivergence, which is how people with different abilities to process information react differently and need different kinds of support services. So Yisker really helps in that way.
Hmm.
The other part I wanted to say, just one more thing.
Yeah, go.
My kids are more philosophical than maybe other people, because around the dinner table when we talk, I'm a philosopher, and I would hear their comments as philosophical. I could say, that's like so-and-so, or you're looking at the problem of such and such. And so they were raised with philosophy problems.
Wow. I love that. So, right, experience how they come and sort of what's encouraged around the dinner table. Nelson, you're making me think of what life was like at your dinner table, where your kids, maybe at around 2 years old, would say, I'm going to eat my vegetables. And you would say, why? And you would say, because they're good. They would say, because they're good for me. And you would say, why? Okay, good. Yes, Karen.
My outlook is based on my perception that people are basically good.
Mhm.
And so sometimes it's really hard for me to understand some of the things that happen around us, because I can't believe anybody would be doing this kind of thing.
So real quick, a couple things, I'm gonna get to Helena. So I also wanted to say one more thing about Nelson, that your point about neurodivergency is where we're headed. So that'll be a great segue as well. That's gonna be a big part of our teaching today. And then Karen, we had a great speaker here as part of our Voices of Israel speaker, Rabbi Yoav Endi from the North, Kibbutz Hanaton, who's with us, right? Wasn't he great? And he was talking about how you can't communicate to Israelis who are young Israelis coming from the army, their service, seeing what they've seen, experiencing what they've experienced, and talk about hope with them, right? That's not going to resonate with them, because what they've experienced, right, really inspires a sense of despair. And so what he did, I thought rather brilliantly, was talk about how despair can actually be a useful tool. And he brought Zionist Zionist thinkers who said, give me those who are despairing, because those who are despairing are not going to rely only on their hope and optimism that things will get better. Those who are despairing will actually do something and build the nation, right? They'll take matters into their own hands. Maybe they perceive they have nothing to lose or whatever. So I thought that was very interesting, that you don't just preach hope. Actually, you need hope. But if you're feeling despair, how do you use that? And so, but if you're a glass half full or glass half empty kind of person, it colors the way you view the world. Absolutely. Helena, go ahead. And then we'll go there.
To Karen, I also thought every people is good, basically, because I was fortunate. My parents, Holocaust survivors, they still saw the good in everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In spite of what they went. But there is something to the fact that brainwashing from an 8-0, and if you brainwash totally all the time, you have to be a martyr, you have to kill, then I don't think it's the fault of the younger generation. That's what they grew up with. That's what they learned. So until then, Golda Meir was very right. Until the mothers, the Palestinian mothers, will love their children a little more than they hate the Jews, maybe there will be peace.
Right. So there's a lot about, again, what is the environment into which you are raised? What is sort of around your breakfast table, right? What is the context? Go ahead. Yes.
Not just environment, it's genetics, it's what your kind of body you grew up with, what your brain is built like.
Great. So there's nature and there's nurture, right? And then there's book smart, there's street smarts, right? There are all these different ways of sort of filtering information about the world or tapping into information in the world. There's different ways of knowing, of understanding. Sheila, last thought, and then we're going to dive into the text. Yeah, protesting. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Very interesting, right? Yes, it's always interesting when our lessons feel like when the text speaks to the current moment. So I'm glad it's resonating. Okay, we're going to dive in. Passover's coming up. Pesach's coming up, which is why you should enjoy your barley soup and anything else here that's coming. your bread. And so we're going to look at Shemot Rabbah. Shemot Rabbah is a midrashic collection on the book of Shemot, Exodus. And many of you may be very familiar with this midrash, but maybe not the full midrash. So even if you've heard about sort of the origins of Moses' speech impediment, you might not know the surrounding midrash. So we're going to dive in. Who would like to read? Be'anglit, bevakasha. Any volunteers? Go ahead, Karen, thanks.
24 months. Rather, it was that he was growing in a manner that was atypical in the land. He brought to her Pharaoh's daughter.
Brought her to Pharaoh's daughter, yes.
Pharaoh was and loving him until he were her son. He would not take him out of the king's palace because he was beautiful. Everyone desired to see him, and anyone who saw him would not leave him.
Okay, so obviously we're talking about Moses growing up in Pharaoh's palace, right? But Paro draws him from the Nile, raises him in the palace, and we're sort of, there's a big gap in the text, right? We don't know anything about Moses's growing up. So Midrash is filling in gaps in that text, right? So we're getting this story about how he was growing up in an atypical manner. It doesn't really explain in what ways Moses is atypical, although saying that he's very adorable and beautiful and everybody's doting on him. Okay, keep going, please.
Pharaoh would kiss him and hug him, and he would take Pharaoh's crown and place it on his head, as he was destined to do when he grew old.
Okay, what is this saying? So go ahead, Shu.
He wasn't doing it for that reason, but one could see that he would become in place as the ruler.
Exactly. So Noah is doing something. My daughter, who's just about 1, where she takes my kippah off of my head and puts it on hers, which is really sweet. It sounds sweeter than it is because I have clips and it really hurts. So I have to sort of power through that to be like, this is so sweet and cute, very nice. But so Moses is basically doing that to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is doting on Noah and Moses, and Moses takes Pharaoh's crown. But what she was picking up on is it's not so adorable here. What Moses is basically saying is, I'm coming for you, right? Your kingship is threatened when I come of age, right? So. That's where we're headed. That's where we're headed. Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. Let's keep reading. Yeah. Okay. When you say doing this, you're saying ascribing that kind of knowledge to a baby. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Okay, good. So if we're just looking at based on if we're trying to be accurate to child development stages, then yes, Moses is just enthralled with the shiny object. Yeah, understood. But it is a rabbinic tool, right? This is a midrash after all. They're taking creative liberties here. So let's keep going.
The Holy Blessed One said to Hiram, I draw fire from your midst. And likewise, Pharaoh's daughter was raising the one who was destined to exactly to drinking from her father.
Yeah, I'm just going to step this out for a second. So Hiram is the king of Tyre. And what is being warned here through the prophet Ezekiel is the fire that is coming from your midst will destroy you. So basically, in other words, or in like horror movie language, the killer's coming from inside the house, right? But basically saying that it's an inside job. So beware that the fire is coming from your midst, meaning Moses, who's the baby in your palace, is going to be the one to supplant you, right? Or to bring down your kingship. Yeah. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, king who is destined to exact retribution from Edom resides with them in the same country as it is stated. There the calf will graze, and there it will lie.
Great. So just another proof text to say that it's in the undoing will come from the same spot of where it's being nurtured, right? The calf will graze there, and then it will also consume its branches. It's coming from Isaiah. So you have 2 different prophets who are being used, who are prophesying about destruction that will come, and it's coming from within. And that's the point. So let's keep going. A new reader, the magicians. Any takers? Volunteers?
I just asked a
Yes.
question about the context. Yehezkel, is that out of context or is that the correct time? It feels out of context, but I don't have enough information. I haven't studied it enough to know.
I think Hiram, the king of Tyre, I think is contemporaries with Solomon. So if we're looking to place it.
Yeah, so earlier.
Yeah.
So it is out.
Earlier than what?
And Yehezkel.
Um,
Yehezkel is prophesying at the beginning of the exile. That's
Right.
way after.
yes. Yeah, so Yehezkel is,
Not way out.
yeah, so prophesying about
They know you're-
a prior
Year,
circumstance.
like the state.
Yeah. Yes. I believe that's accurate. Okay, the magicians.
This one, picture crown and places it on. Lest he be the one regarding whom we said that he is destined to wrest your kingdom from you.
Yeah.
Some of them said to behead him, some said to burn him. Yitro was sitting in their midst, that's interesting, and saying to them, this boy has no intelligence, rather test him. Bring before him a bowl with gold and a hot coal at the expense of taking. He has intelligence and you should execute him. And if he extends his hand to the coal, he has no intelligence, he has no sentence of death. Immediately they brought it before him and he extended his hand to take the gold. Gabriel came and pushed his hand. He seized the coal, placed his hand with the coal into his mouth, and his tongue was burned. From that he became slow of speech and slow of tongue. She named him Moses. From here you learn the reward of those who perform acts of kindness. Although Moses had many names, the name that was set for him throughout the Torah was only the one that Baca, daughter of Pharaoh, called him. Even the Holy One, even the Holy Blessed One did not call him by any other name.
Yes, it's just Bob Paro. Yeah. Right. Even, yeah, good point. So both Jerry and Ron are saying that where the name Batya is given to her, right? She's only referenced as Bat Paro. But Batya, meaning daughter of God, I think is a name that's given to her by the rabbis. But okay, so a couple things going on here. So we're getting the origin of Moses' speech impediment, right? When God chooses Moses from out of the midst of the fire, there's fire imagery again. Moses has sent somebody else, right? I'm not a good spokesperson. How could I be your mouthpiece, God, when I'm not a good speaker? And then God says, well, take your brother Aaron and do. And then as we know, Moses arcs to being Ish Devarim, right? He's the author of the book of rabbinically understood of Devarim, which means words, which is 5 discourses of Moses. So Moses goes from somebody who is not a man of words to giving us the book of Devarim, 5 discourses where he monologues for long. So that's his arc. But he starts out as a person slow speech, and we don't know why. And here the rabbis are giving us the midrash. It's because of this test. And he was tested to see if he had intelligence, right? And it's interesting I think of my sister-in-law who does autism assessment. She's a clinical psychologist. And it's sort of interesting to see what kind of tests and how do you ascertain and what is knowledge, right? What does it mean to understand? Are there different kinds of, is there only one way of perceiving the world? Are there multiple ways? And the other thing that I think of with coal is that it's a purifying device, right? Isaiah, it might be Ezekiel, but I think it's Isaiah. Or Jeremiah, I'm sorry. Is it Jeremiah? Who in his origin story, God purifies his mouth by putting hot coal in it. So there's something also about, is it an impediment or is it actually something bringing him closer to God and making him more suited to be God's purveyor, God's messenger?
I think the interesting question is what's Yitro doing here?
Right.
Because even if something like this imagined scene ever actually happened, it doesn't seem likely that a Midianite priest would be there.
Right.
So what is the rabbi who wrote this saying by putting Yitro in the picture?
That's a great question, and I wonder if anybody has any leads, right? But for some context, Yitro is Moses' father-in-law. Moses meets Yitro when he's shepherding out in Midian, when he runs away after smiting the Egyptian taskmaster. So it's odd that Yitro is being placed here in the palace as like among Pharaoh's court and advisors, right? We know the magicians, we know where they come. It makes sense that they would be here. It's odd that Yitro's here. Although for me, I personally think Yitro, like Gabriel, might be a sort of guardian angel. I'm thinking of Reuben saying, well, wait, we don't have to kill Joseph, right? Let's throw him in a pit and then we'll figure it, right? Why don't we can sit the brothers say that we can sell him, right? Let's do that. So I sort of see him as saying, oh, whoa, let's not kill the boy, right? Let's test him. Maybe it's a way of sort of giving Moses a chance at life. And then Gabriel comes to, so I don't know if the rabbis are treating Yitro like a guardian angel, a sort of somebody who.
See the rabbis doing this kind of thing from time to time, so maybe this is like a kind of not wink, wink way, but Yitro, in Parashat Yitro, when he's telling Moshe, why, how he happened to come and when he did, he'd seen all the great things that God has done. So the person who sees the great things that God has done could set up a test where any normal child theoretically would go for the shiny object and not the hot coal.
Yeah, right. So Yitro is an interesting character, right? And we know that he comes to Moses and after hearing what God had done, and I know Rabbi Hal gave a sermon about all the midrash around what was it that he saw? Was it the splitting of the sea? Was it giving him the commandments? Chronologically, how does it all work out, right? It's a larger question, but maybe Yitro here has some kind of greater perception here. Somehow being privy to what God is doing, and maybe that's why he knows to give Moses a test like this. Go ahead.
So Yitro was a big guy in Midian. And that time there was famine all over the place, and the only place that could get food is next to the Nile in Egypt. So maybe all the big people from all over came there, and that's why he was there.
That could be. Maybe it's circumstantial. Maybe they're in Egypt because there's famine. I don't think it's clear from the text. Go ahead, and then we're gonna move on. Yeah, that could be too.
As we appear later on.
Yeah. Right.
No one knows exactly who and such.
Shifra and Pua are actually Miriam and Yocheved. Go ahead, Jerry. Then we're gonna move on.
Maybe represents the good or the good non-Jews. No one. I believe it if someone came up and said he represents.
So maybe to say that not all Egyptians were Pharaoh, right? Maybe there were some righteous Gentiles. He was a Midianite priest, right?
If he was so impressed by what he saw among the Israelite people, why didn't he try to join them? Stayed as an outsider.
Right. Ultimately, he doesn't stay. And that's the question. When Moses invites him to stay, why does he leave? Especially if he recognizes that God has performed miracles for them, right? So that's a great question. And I know the rabbis wrestle with that as well. But I want to keep going here. So now I want us to turn, as we're trying to unpack the different ways of perception, the difference between knowledge, wisdom, understanding, because our tradition makes use of all these words. But we know that our tradition isn't redundant, so there must be a different meaning between these. So what I find so fascinating is that our tradition acknowledges that there are different ways of perceiving the world, different ways of learning, which I think is remarkable, again, to see all the ways in which our ancient tradition is ahead of its time, right? It seems like a very modern conversation to talk about education and the different ports of entry and different learners and coming up with learning plans and recognizing that not everybody, either you have it or you don't have it. Like either you can learn or you don't, you're smart or you're not smart. You're intelligent or you're not intelligent, right? That was the question that Yitro says. We'll see if Moses is intelligent or not intelligent. If he's not intelligent, meaning he goes for the coal, then he's no threat. And that's why when the angel Gabriel guides him to the cold, they spare him because they're like, oh, well, he's not a threat. He's a dummy, basically, right? He's not going to be a threat, which is wrong, right? They underestimate him, right? But that also is a big point that I want to unpack, which is that in rabbinic literature, everything is about what you learn, right? The rabbis are all about learning, and learning is done how? Yes, there's reading, but given that we're an oral tradition, mostly it's hearing, discussing, learning, right? It's an oral tradition. It's kriyat. Torah is chanted and it's heard, it's listened, right? So to Shema Yisrael, that's why it's Shema of all the words, right? Shema, hear, O Israel. So if you couldn't hear, if you were deaf, at the time, you might be written off as somebody incapable of learning, right? You might fall into the rabbinic category of shoteh, right? Or cheresh. That's why they're lumped together, right? The deaf person, shoteh is, it's hard to define. It could be the person who's mad, like madness. Imbecile is sometimes used, right? These are offensive terms, but to describe somebody, and they're a katan, a minor, these are put into the same category. Should they be? Right? Is a deaf person in the same category as a katan? An adult? No, it shouldn't be. But if at the time you're not able to teach somebody, you don't have either the technical ability, the know-how, or the sort of cultural enlightenment to recognize that just because they can't hear doesn't mean they can't learn, right? Then you might make the mistake of that miscategorization, right? But I love that our tradition is acknowledging that there's chokhmah, bina, and da'at, which we're going to get to, and that there's different ways of learning and maybe different ways of teaching based on different types of learners. Go ahead, let's go around.
And yet we have this story of none so blind as will not see, where the donkey gets punished because the perpetrator of hurting him can't see what the donkey saw.
I love it. So that I've always loved as a very spiritual concept in Judaism, that there are different kinds of creatures, and different creatures may have different abilities in terms of perception that we might lack, right? So in this case, Balaam is a prophet for hire going to curse the Israelites, and his donkey sees an angel stopping him, that God sends to stop him from cursing us. Balaam doesn't see it. The donkey sees the angel first, and the donkey stops. And Balaam thinks the donkey is just being disobedient, and so he beats the donkey. And God opens up the donkey's mouth, and the donkey says, "What are you hitting me for? Aren't I your loyal donkey? What have I have a history of doing this to you? I've only been your loyal donkey." Right? Don't you think if I'm stopping, I must have a good reason, right? And Balaam has a conversation with, and then God opens Balaam's eyes to see the angel standing in their way. But that's to say that maybe animals who we might also write off as not being capable of intelligence or what have you, do have in their own way an ability to understand a deep emotional life, or maybe even a deeper connection than we do in some ways, perceptions that we lack.
The Rabbi mentioned knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. That's reminiscent to me of Chabad.
Yes.
The acronym for that camp.
Yes.
I wonder the people are going to speak about whatever they contributed. Were they pre-Chabadniks or what?
Yes, well, Chabad is a Hasidic movement, and it's an acronym, as you rightly pointed out, for Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. And that's where it's a good segue because that's where we're headed. What is Chokhmah? What is Bina? What is Da'at? We're going to explore what those things are. Being a mystical Hasidic Kabbalistic movement, they're referring to the Sfirot. There are different Sfirot in Kabbalah. Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at are all emanations of God. They're different circles on the Sphirotic chart, right? But yeah, well, Kabbalah is Aaronic, so you can say Sphironic. Go ahead.
So a good example. Is the rider moving forward, and the horse stops before it goes over the cliff. Now, is that the horse or is that God?
Right, it's a good question, right? So the rider would keep going, and the horse, being literally closer to the terrain, sees it first and stops. And you're saying, is it the horse? Is it God? Is God intervening just like Gabriel, the angel, steering Moses in the right direction? It's a good question, right? Maybe the answer is it's all of it. But
The dog or the They can smell diseases.
Yeah. If you've read the book The Art of Racing in the Rain, they made it a movie too. It's told from the perspective of a dog, and one of the characters is sick. This woman who's married to this guy who becomes widowed because she dies, and the dog picks up on it first. Says that the dog could smell the cancer in it, even before she knew about it. Yeah, so different perception, right? Different way of knowing. Wow. Interesting. You're saying dogs used for kids with diabetes to detect it. Interesting. So I want to go to a prayer we say every day. Every time we say the Amidah, so 3 times a day. It's the first prayer that is in the Bakash, that starts the Bakasha section where we're asking God for things, right? It follows immediately the Kedusha. And it's the first prayer of request. And it is for what? Understanding. So who wants to read? You could do it in Hebrew or in English or both. Go for it, Helena. Thank you.
חונק לאדם דעת ומלמד לאנוש בינה. חננו מיתפת דעה, בינה והשכל. ברוך אתה אדוני כונן הדעת.
Great. Do you want to read the English too?
You favor humans with knowledge and teach humankind understanding. Grant us knowledge, understanding, and intellect from you. Blessed are you, Hashem, grantor of knowledge.
So there's a couple interesting things here, right? We see da'a, we see bina, and we see haskel. These are different ways of understanding. And we see da'at at the end, God. And chonen da'at, which is bestowing, gifting. So Abu Draham, who I brought up before to talk about the Avot prayer, the first blessing of the Amidah, and where his approach to prayer is, let's see where in the Torah these words come from. And once we know where it comes from, we actually have a deeper understanding of the prayer itself. And he kind of uses that as his own kind of midrash to say, because sometimes that word appears multiple times in Torah, but he chooses specific instances in order to make his argument of how we should be looking at the prayer. So let's see which ones he chooses. First from Psalms 94:10, who wants to read? Go ahead, thanks, Sherry.
About whose nations not punished, the one who instructs humans in knowledge.
I love this psalm. I believe it's a psalm for Wednesday, when we say for Wednesday, but it's talking about those who would say, where is God, right? God doesn't see. God appears to not hear my cry, right, when I pray. God doesn't see. And the psalmist kind of has a retort to that line of reasoning, which says, shall the one who gives us the ability to see, not see? Right? Shall the one who plants the ear not hear? Shall the one who gives us knowledge not know? So what Abu Draham does in linking Hamelamed Adam Da'at, which you can see the prayer when it says Atah chonen l'adam da'at umelamed le'onosh bina. You can see it's interesting because the prayer is actually misquoting Torah here. It's not a direct, and that is probably intentional, but it's misquoting Torah there for a reason. But first to say that my ability to perceive points to a higher intelligence, and it's interesting that this is the beginning, one of the beginning prayers of the Amidah, right? Before I really get into all of my requests, first I want to acknowledge that by virtue of the fact that I can see, that I can hear, that I can speak, and not all of us can, but can in our own ways, right? The fact that we have an ability to perceive points to the existence of a higher intelligence, the source of these things. And Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel has a great quote that's in a debate with Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, who's a naturalist, who says, God is not a supernatural transcendent being. Mordechai Kaplan, as a naturalist, says, God is the force in nature that leads to thriving. Right? And Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, I don't think this was in a direct debate, but you could see it as a debate, says, unless God is at least as real as I am, what am I doing here? Right? I have to believe that God is at least as real as I am. I'm not coming down one way or the other. There are, in the conservative movement especially, there are so many different ways of conceiving of God or of rejecting the idea of God as well, of course, but I love this concept, which is evidence of God lies in the fact that I can perceive, right? My consciousness points to a higher consciousness, a source of that consciousness, which I think is interesting. So go ahead,
I
yeah.
think this abstract notion of God, I understand, quite contrary to Christianity. How do you instruct maybe your daughter? How are you going to teach her about the more abstract nature of God? Or that there's a higher power up there dressed in some sort of garb that monitors you do the right thing and you'll be okay? How do you instruct a child to adjust to this more abstract nature of God? Are children more likely to perceive something that's more humanized, so to speak?
It's a great question. And when putting on my camp counselor or rabbi for children hat, what I tend to do is if a child comes to me and says, I don't believe in God, Rabbi, first of all, I don't persuade. It's not my brand of rabbi to be like, well, you must, and that makes you a good Jew, right? As we know, Judaism is much more about behavior and mitzvot than it is about what you believe personally, right? But what I say is, tell me, what is the God you don't believe in? Who is the God that you don't believe in? And they'll say, well, I don't believe that God is an old man in the sky with a big long beard who looks down, and if we're good, gives me a good reward, and if I'm bad, punishes me. And I say, great, I don't believe in that God either. We both don't believe in the same God, right? And that's where I start out, by validating that. First, let's define what we mean when we say God, and then we can have a conversation about the God that I do believe in, right? Which is not that cartoon God, right? And then that's sort of how I open it up, but it's a great question. So thank you for joining us. Good luck. No, I'll be fortunately. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next. Now we're unpacking where these words in this prayer comes from. There's another word that we haven't yet seized on. So who wants to read from Exodus 33:19, which brings us back to Moses later in life? Go ahead, Jerry. Thanks.
And God said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name. He said, oh, let me behold your presence. And God answered Moses, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name Hashem, and the grace that I grant, and the compassion that I show.
So what Abudraham says by connecting the prayer with this verse, where you find v'chanoti, right? And that is what word in the prayer? V'chanoti. Chonen, ata chonen, you gift, right? So the recognition that God gifts consciousness, the ability to perceive, that we're starting our prayer in the Amidah from that place of recognizing that what a miracle that I can perceive, and that ability to perceive is a gift from God, right? It doesn't necessarily look a single way, but again, it's trying to access that place of praise before you move into your bakasha request, that this is consciousness is a gift from God. Jack.
What Solomon wants, and he said he wants an understanding heart.
Exactly right. That Solomon asked for an understanding heart. When God says, I'll give you whatever you want, and that's what he asks. And that, to our sages, is the best thing you could ask for, right? Give me wisdom.
It's more than wisdom as, something that's a dictionary response.
Yes, right. It's not just knowledge. It's not just what you know. It's something deeper than that. And we're going to get to that when we step out. Rashi has he actually says, he defines for us, what is wisdom, what is bina, what is chokhmah, understand, and what is da'at. What are the different knowledge, wisdom, and understanding? How are they different? So we'll get there.
Don't we have to go back a step? Hasn't God lent us our body, let alone our perception? So everything, physical and abstract, are both, from what we're reading, gifts from God.
Absolutely. And I would say that even before the Amidah, so I think you're saying it should be in the Amidah before thanking God for understanding. There should be thanking God for our bodies. It's not in the Amidah necessarily, but one of the very first prayers in the preliminary prayers in Psuke de Zimra, of course, is thanking God for a body that works. If even one thing didn't work the way it's supposed to, we could be done for, right? So just acknowledging the miracle that is the gift of a body that is healthy. So it is one of the first things we say. First is Moda Ani, thank you for my soul. Then you wash your hands, and then you thank you, God, for your body, and then you thank God for perception, the ability to perceive. Go ahead.
I'm probably way off base here. But unusually. Okay, in this quote,
You gotta talk loud.
in this quote, it says grant grace and compassion.
Mhm.
And in the prayer, it says grant knowledge. So are we equating grace and compassion with knowledge, or are we just using the one word grant?
Well, so here in the verse, so V'chanoti et asher achon v'richamti, that's the grace there, it's mercy, rechem, right, rachamim, mercy et asher arachem, that I will.
Question.
Okay, so what's your
The
question?
question is grace and compassion somehow equated with the knowledge in the prayer? Or are we only picking out the one word?
Picking out the one word.
Oh, I see, yeah. Abudraham is just saying, where does the word chonen come from in the Torah? Where in Torah can we find chonen, and why is it in our prayer in the Amidah? And he's pointing here and linking it through the word.
So
It's just that one word.
Picking out one word.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so now let's get to Rashi.
Stuff.
And but the context matters. The context is he's saying that's what's going to deepen our understanding of the prayer.
Knowledge.
Yeah. Well, so here's what I'll say. Here's how I'm making the link. I like that. The way that for me linking so here's what Abudraham would say. When you say this prayer, thanking God for knowledge, put yourself in the cleft of the rock where Moses is as God passes before Moses, right? Put yourself in that intimate encounter with God where Moses is saying, let me see your glory. And God says, you can't see my face and live, which is saying what? As we're thanking God for knowledge, we're also acknowledging that we can't know it all. And that's where we're starting, right? That there is a limit to human perception, but God gifts us the ability to perceive, even though it's limited. And it's coming from this place of intimate longing to know God. And what's interesting is it starts our prayer of Bakasha, our now we're going to be asking God for things, and we start off with a swing and a miss. Because does God say yes to Moses? God says, no, you can't see my face and live. Right? So God is denying Moses' request, but saying, but I will pass before you and you'll see my proverbial back, right? You'll see my back.
Amazing consolation.
You get an amazing consolation prize. But here's right, but so there's this desire to know God and this response that there's a limit to human perception, but I've given you a pathway nonetheless. And by the way, what's so beautiful is the midrash that when Moses dies, how does Moses die? God kisses Moses, is what they say. So Moses sees God's face and then dies. So in the end, Moses' request actually is answered. And it's a much more compassionate way of looking at God not allowing Moses into the promised land. And you feel like, how could God be punishing Moses so much? And that's a valid complaint and concern. But the rabbis say that he died with a kiss, that ultimately Moses does see God's face and then dies. So once you do sort of and then Moses has full comprehension, right? Then you really know it all at that point. But it can't be contained in this body. There's another, I think I brought this when we were talking about Milchamta Shel Torah, the war of Torah, that the rabbi is studying so hard that he's not realizing that he's sort of, I think he's sitting on his fingertips, his fingers, and he's focusing so hard he bleeds. And it's sort of a peculiar passage. Why is the Talmud saying this? And one interpretation that I love is that divine knowledge cannot be contained in the human body. Right? It's sort of a violent, that's why it's called the war of Torah. It's sort of a violent process of putting infinite knowledge into a finite container. Right. So I think that sort of like bursting through is that idea that there's only so much that we can know. And then Moses finally dies, but maybe while he doesn't get to experience the promised land, he he reaches a higher level of knowledge, perhaps. But the infinite, he touches the infinite. Okay, let's go to Rashi and how he defines the different kinds of perceptions. This is coming as a commentary to Exodus 31:3, which we just read last week when we read about Betzalel. So who wants to read? Go for it. Thanks. Oh, sorry, Shu. I'll get you for the next one.
I have endowed Betzalel with a divine spirit of skill, ability, and knowledge in every kind of craft.
Great. So look at what's present in this verse. B'chokhmah, uvitvuna, uvada'at. So that's chokhmah, bina, and da'at. That's Chabad. And Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God. Keep that in mind, because that is actually one of the definitions that Rashi is going to use. I think Miriam marries either, isn't it Nachshon or is it Caleb? Might be Caleb. And that he comes back later and maybe, I don't remember in what way. I'm not sure. But there you go. That's sort of your theory with Yitro being in that first midrash too. Yeah. Okay, good. So who wants to read this one? Shu, I think I said you would, right? Yeah, you can. Yes, now go ahead and read the Rashi would be good.
Is understanding my own intelligence, reducing it from the things one is already. And that means whole.
That's kind of Ruach Elohim maybe, right? So we're trying to understand what the difference is between what, because again, Torah's not redundant. If we're using these three different words, they must mean different things. So Chokhmah, Rashi says, is wisdom. This is something that my grandpa always taught me. My grandpa, who, like Nelson, was a philosopher too, a philosophy major. He said, knowledge is what you know, and wisdom is knowing how much you don't know. Right? That you might have a lot of knowledge, but not a lot of wisdom. Wisdom is knowing how much you don't know. And I feel like that's kind of here, right? Wisdom is what a person hears from others and learns. If you have so much knowledge, you might think I don't need to learn from others, right? But Ezehu Chacham, who's the one that's wise? The one who learns from others. Yeah. The one who learns from everyone, right?
One can spout a lot of wisdom, and yet whoever listens to that wisdom may be on a totally different page in terms of how they interpret that language, how it's worded. And they may not inspire them. They maybe have different concepts and still be inspired, depending on their linguistic lens.
That's a great point. Right, absolutely. Okay, so then Bina, understanding, is understanding a matter by one's own intelligence, deducing it from the things one has already learned. So in some ways, you might say that this is sort of an application of that wisdom, right? If wisdom is learning from others or taking in from others, and Bina is what you yourself are able to surmise, right? So I think it's sort of going deeper, maybe applying what you learned in a way that is knowledge that you are arriving at yourself, deducing it from the things you've already learned. And then Da'at seems like it's next level, right? It seems like maybe we're deepening and deepening to the point of Da'at, which is holy inspiration. Maybe that's on that next level. That's kind of maybe what Moses ultimately gets at the end of his life. Or...
But the Da'at is maybe I see it, and you hinted at what you absorb from your wisdom and understanding.
I like that. So maybe it's what you absorb from your wisdom and understanding. Yeah, and I think yeah. But I do think Da'at is right. We are praying for Da'at in the end, right? If you go back to our prayer, it's something that we think must be achievable in this world, right? Atachmanan ladam da'at. You give people knowledge. Umelamed le'enosh bina, and you teach people understanding. So again, maybe it's like, maybe it's in this order for a reason. First, comes da'at in this sense, right? It's sort of inverting Rashi, who
Yeah.
kind of puts it the other way in order. Maybe our prayer is saying the rabbis want us to think of da'at as being what comes first, knowledge, sort of the raw material, then you help us, you give us understanding, what do we do with that raw data, with that raw material, right? How do we weave it into a deeper understanding or contextualize or deduce from it? And then bina Haskell being one that we haven't touched on, but sort of another way of understanding. Baruch atah Adonai chonen hadat, who gives knowledge.
That's all I was given the inspiration.
Yeah, right.
That come from God.
He has Ruach Elohim. He's given a holy inspiration. He has the knowledge to work with all these different crafts.
In today's world, people very often say, how do artists think of these things, the things that they produce? What comes to them
Mhm.
that allows them to be inspired to create something?
Like a creative genius. You say that's just somebody who has an extra dose of something special. Right? Like, I don't know how you look at this and you're like that is just next level. That's somebody who has, in this case, da'at, right? That holy inspiration. Go ahead. Okay.
Like you say,
Mm-hmm. Echad mi yodea. Mhm. 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 Yeah, so maybe da'at is a much more special kind of knowing that we've kind of cheapened by using it, so we throw it away. Go ahead.
Because I'm struggling with what might be the semantic problem
Mhm.
and also the translation problem, which are related but in some ways different. Because the word in where we started with Moshe is da'at.
Mhm.
And if you think of that as knowledge, you say to yourself, well, and maybe this is where we denigrate the word, like you're saying, well, what would you expect him to know at his age in the story?
Mhm.
So it can't be knowledge in that sense, unless what we're saying is that if the knowledge comes from God and Gabriel is merely a messenger of that, then that's the knowledge.
Mhm.
He knew enough to go for a burning coal,
Mhm.
because he was directed by
Right.
God, if you will.
Right. So what is the knowledge? Is it Moses's knowing not to avoid the coal and go for the gold, or is the knowledge that an angel intervened and directed him, and that's knowledge is that sort of divine gift of God, of so an inspiration stepping in some way to guide you.
It's somewhat ragged, because I'm making it ragged in my own head. I've got a circle.
Yeah.
Of how to understand these different words,
Mhm.
both at the level of what do you think they mean?
Yeah.
And then realizing that what do you think they mean is
Right.
not.
It's all up for interpretation.
As that's exactly right. As
Yeah.
somebody famously said, every translation
Is a form.
commentary.
Yes,
So,
exactly. So I just want to say with the final 6 minutes, there are two texts that I really want to get to because I think it's sort of is the arc of where I want to head with this session, which is our tradition clearly acknowledges that there are different ways of perceiving, right? And it gives us our hero Moses, who is of uncircumcised lips, or else Fatayim, who's got a stutter, a speech impediment, and yet he becomes Ish Devarim. He is God's spokesperson and mouthpiece to Pharaoh, and ultimately author of Devarim, right? So clearly there is a central place for people who have different kinds of intelligences, right? Clearly Judaism wants to embrace and incorporate and acknowledge and again, embrace the different ways of knowing, as opposed to saying that you either do or you don't, or there's one way, or if you like the rabbis putting into the same category, one who cannot hear and a child, or a shoteh, somebody who's mad or an imbecile. Is that actually the Jewish value, or is it just back then not having the ability to recognize that they're capable of learning and an infrastructure to teach But that truly is what's Jewish, that we must find the ways to communicate, because everybody is capable of learning in their own way. So I want us to read this from the Shulchan Aruch, which is our code of laws. It is commenting on something that we're going to get a drash at the end from Rabbi Brad Artson, who we're going to be bringing out as a scholar in residence.
Is it
And a big-
Kohanim?
Yes, so there is in Parshat Emor, we get what seems to be discriminating against Kohanim that have disabilities, right? That and Rabbi Artson will get to this in his sermon, in his little draft. It's not a whole sermon, it's a little draft. But yes, okay, you have a question on it.
I believe, or I read somewhere, that anyone who has some form of deformity
Mhm.
is not allowed to go to the Torah. It's Torah.
So where that probably comes from, the question of if you have a deformity, can you not come to the Torah? I do not believe that that's correct, but what I think it's coming from is from Emor, which says that of the priests, of the Kohanim, you cannot officiate in the temple, you can't perform the sacrifices if you have a mum being a blemish. And it lists some of those things, right? And that would seem on its face to be discriminating against people. And isn't that antithetical to the Jewish values I'm making the case for? So I want to attack it in two ways. One is from the Shulchan Aruch and one is from Rabbi Artson. I'll just read real quickly for time. One who has a deformity on his face or his hands should not perform the priestly blessing because the congregation will stare at him. So that gives us a rationale, right? Why is it discriminating against? And in this case, it's saying the Birkat saying Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing. And it's because you're supposed to have complete concentration, and knowing our human flaws, we're going to be distracted by somebody's deformities. And so that's why. It's because it'll just
Look at the Kohen.
that's the Kohen is supposed to be covered anyway, and you're not supposed to be looking. But maybe there are other kinds of, it's not just physical deformities, right? There are other deformities too, but that's a great point, right? Why would it shouldn't even be a problem. Why is it being listed as a problem? I hadn't thought of that. So I now need to look at this deeper and reconcile that. But
The explanation for why this is here. False assumption that everything we do now is how it always was.
yeah,
Maybe the reason it's that way is we don't want to single out the person who has the deformity.
mhm.
So everybody covers up and nobody looks.
Interesting. That's interesting. Hold on. There's a lot of great comments, but only because I want to honor the time. We'll get to comments at the end. I want to go ahead and get us through these last two texts because it's worth it. So, and the same applies for one who has a deformity on his feet in a place where they ascend to the platform without socks, right? It's going to be distracting. And so too, one who has spittle or mucus drooling down his beard, or if his eyes tear up, and similarly one who is blind in one of his eyes, all these should not perform the priestly blessing. However, if he is broken in, meaning well known in his city, meaning that they are familiar with him and everyone recognizes that he has this deformity, he may perform the blessing even if he is blind in both eyes. So I have a rabbi colleague, Rabbi Sam Rothenberg, who has a Tourette's, and he's got a stutter, and he loves this text because what it does is, as rabbinic text is wont to do, it takes a law that might seem uncaring or problematic, or how could God really demand this of us, right? I'm thinking, stone your wayward and rebellious children. And the rabbis, by honoring and reading it so closely, actually say that God never wanted us to practice this, and they do it in a very authentic and loving way. And here I feel like it's happening with that prohibition, saying that, well, what's meant here is you're not supposed to be distracted. That's what it's forbidding, because it's so important that you're paying full attention. And you won't be distracted if you actually know your community, right? If you are excluding people with neurodivergencies or disabilities, then they're going to be a distraction to you, and you're going to be distracted from your prayers. But if you embrace them and weave them into the fabric of your community, it becomes second. It's not a distraction for you anymore. It's not. So actually, the solution is not to exclude them. It's to dafka include them, right? So that then it's no longer a distraction for your peers. So I want to just end with Rabbi Artson here, and then if you like what you see, I encourage you to come when he's in person. This is the dean of Ziegler. He's the dean of, and look, this is from 1999. Context that he is open about, and wouldn't mind my sharing. He has a son with severe autism, Jacob, and I think at this point, I'm just surmising that he would probably have been diagnosed, or so I wonder if I would think that that's influencing what he wrote here. It is technically past time. If anybody needs to go, I don't want to hold you, but if you have another minute, I'm just going to read through this now. Finally, our society is beginning to discuss the countless ways in which we have made life difficult for the people who are lame, blind, deaf, mute, or who suffer from one of the many physical impediments that can restrict their lives. Over the centuries, most of humanity responded to handicaps in other ways, by turning their backs to them, preferring to blame them in some ways for their disabilities, rather than make the effort to strengthen the human connection that binds each to all. That meant, go ahead. Or kill them, right? Thinking eugenics, right? The mentally ill, schizophrenics, and others were isolated in institutions, more often to shield the members of society from the reality of such people and their suffering than to provide any real assistance to them. Only of late are efforts being made to communicate and to educate people who in ages past would have been consigned to a life of silent degradation and exclusion. Are we okay? I know I'm going fast, but we're good? Okay.
That's why people were committed to violence.
Right. Kind of tuck them away from society as opposed to really help them, is what he's saying here, for them by and large. Let's keep going. The Torah also speaks about disabilities, reflecting a complex balance of values, priorities, and perceptions. On the one hand, many of the biblical leaders themselves suffered from physical handicaps. Jacob was crippled in his walking, remember when he wrestles with the angel? Moses was a stutterer. We've touched on that at length here. Miriam suffered from leprosy, and Isaac from blindness. Remember with Jacob and Esau and mixing up the blessing. Saul had bouts of insanity, right? David would soothe him with the harp, and severe depression. These leaders and many others in the Tanakh and rabbinic literature were able to surmount their disabilities and to lead the Jewish people in exemplary fashion. Yet the Torah clearly prefers wholeness. In describing what disqualifies a Kohen from offering sacrifices in the temple, this week's Torah portion, which was Amor, states that no man of your offspring throughout the ages who has a defect shall be qualified to offer the food of his God. The Torah then goes on to specify what those defects are. Those who are blind, lame, who have a limb too short or too long, broken arm or leg, those who are humpback, dwarfs, those who have a growth in their eye, a boil scar, scurvy, or crushed testes. All those who suffer from these afflictions are prohibited from offering a sacrifice in the temple. Oh, that's good. That's good. I like that.
List was complete. And if the list was complete, nobody would have qualified to do it, and there would be no sacrifices.
Oh, interesting. So that's again sort of a limiting it out of existence. Yeah. Right. How do you define these terms? Yeah. And is it meant to be literal or not? Right. Okay, so let's keep going. Certainly, this passage and others like it lent biblical weight to the dehumanization of the disabled. Legislation and rabbinics confirmed that the blind, deaf, mute, and developmentally disabled were not allowed to participate as full members of society. This is what we talked about, right? Those classifications, either by functioning as acceptable witnesses in legal proceedings or as members of the minyan in religious services. Right? They didn't count, or they couldn't be trusted for certain positions, or they didn't count them in. While those and we actually have talked about in other sections why that might be. How can you say Yotzer or Vorei Choshech, God who creates the luminaries, if you don't benefit from the luminaries, if you're blind and you don't benefit from, but the rabbis rule you do benefit, because if the sun is out or if you're carrying a torch, others will see you and come to your aid if you're blind and in need of help. So in that way they do. So again, that's the rabbis arriving at inclusion. Exactly right. So let's keep going. While those prohibitions may have been reasonable in a time when no one could figure out how to educate or communicate with the disabled, the legacy those rules leave remains a tragedy in our day. But there is another way of understanding this verse as well. Medieval commentators noted that precisely those traits which disqualify a Kohen from performing his duties also disqualified an animal from being a sacrificial offering. Both the sacrifice and the one performing the sacrifice could not suffer from any mum, defect. At the same time, anyone, regardless of suffering those defects or not, was certainly welcome to bring a sacrifice to the temple, and that sacrifice would be accepted by the Kohanim and would function or to bring atonement between the individual and God. So what he's saying here is, yes, they were disqualified from officiating, but they were not disqualified from offering animals that had to have the same criteria of not being blemished. So he's going to explain why that matters. In other words, both Kohen and animal functioned not as representatives of human values and ideals, but rather as instruments in the temple ritual. Just as you wouldn't use a broken hammer to build a house, the Torah insists that only Kohanim, whose body can represent the typical Israelite by virtue of its lack of any singular or distinctive traits, is a fitting implement for repairing God's relationship with Jewish individuals. And he actually gets this from a midrash that he's about to quote, that it's likened to, the rabbis say it's like you wouldn't use a broken hammer. You wouldn't use a quote unquote broken, which is offensive to say, but broken Kohen. But the point is saying that they are just instruments. This is not a reflection of who's included or who's excluded or what is the Jewish value or ideal. It's simply saying that when the Kohen is officiating in this function, he is like a hammer. He's like a tool. And so that tool, like the animal you're offering, needs to be unblemished. Let's keep going. Midrash Vayikra Rabbah picks up on this essential insight and makes explicit that no one is disbarred from offering a sacrifice regardless of their disability or handicap. To the contrary, God cherishes those who wrestle with their handicaps and have to make a greater effort to live their lives. Said Rabbi Abba Bar Yudan, whatever blemish God declared invalid in the case of a beast was declared valid in the case of a person. Just as God declared invalid in the case of a beast one that was blind or broken, so God declared the same valid in the case of a person, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Right? God says that God wants a broken heart, right? That human brokenness actually attracts God, not the other way, not repels God. In a very real sense, we are all handicapped, all of us disabled. Each of us balances personal weaknesses, inabilities, injuries, working to compensate for them so they don't prevent us from living our lives to our fullest. In this regard, the Midrash and even this Torah portion reminds us that only implements like hammers, kohanim, and sacrifices lack blemish. And only in them is a blemish a disqualification. For the rest of us, struggling to be decent, loving, and good, blemishes and disabilities are the catalysts that force us to wrestle with our own fears and inadequacies and to grow. So thank you, everybody. I'll give him the final word there. Sure, some final comments and questions.
Today's discussion is very, very relevant in terms of what is happening in colleges and will happen more and more. Instructor syllabi are being looked at in terms of their specific course information and the degree to which it is accessible by students who are blind, students who have reading problems, etc. What are you doing to make your course more accessible to people with these challenges? That's happening now.
Yeah.
I don't have to anymore. You guys out.
You're right. Yeah, and it's an important reminder. I once gave a quiz to a class and one student failed the quiz and I had failed to realize that she was on a learning plan where she is dyslexic. She couldn't read the questions but in a verbal conversation, you could see what she knew, right? Thank you, everybody. An early Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for joining us as always.